Thank you very much, Philippe and Fouk, for inviting me. So this is a joint work with my colleague Omar Licandro, and we're going to talk about the effects of international trade on competition, innovation, and growth. Luckily, this is going to be mostly an empirical, a theoretical paper. Philippe is going to pretty much do the empirics of this model at the end of the day, I suppose. Well, you're going to talk about Brexit, probably. So in a couple of days, in England, we are going to have this historical referendum. As you can imagine, if you have followed, the debate has been very heated. And economists have been called to give numbers to the consequences of Britain going out of the European Union. These are the numbers that the Treasury came up with. A big chunk of these losses imputed to Brexit are due to the potential increase in trade barriers that exiting the European Union would imply for the UK. Now, so exiting the European Union for the UK implies a reduction in integration, in trade integration, among other things, but mainly it's a reduction in trade integration. So what do we know about this key question? Why should countries integrate through trade, right? So the key reason is that there's going to be benefits in terms of income, right? They're going to come from different sources, okay? There are side effects, right, to these benefits, that the benefits cannot be equally distributed, a little bit like the previous talk was showing that the benefits from technological progress can be unequally distributed. Similarly are the benefits from trade. And very key to the current debate in England, trade integration can lead to some loss of sovereignty, okay? So now, here is the question. If the gains of the first bullet, the welfare gains, the benefits, the economic benefits for the country as a whole are not big enough, why do we want to bother to face the distributional inequality and cost of trade and the loss of sovereignty? So this is a classic question for economists, and it's a long-standing challenge. Okay? Because in many of the models we have and applications of these models, gains are not that big. Right? So recently, there's been a revolution in economics that has started in international trade, but has moved to economic growth and other fields, where we have availability of firm-level data, and we can work with models where firms are different. These type of models allowed us to discover new welfare gains from trade. Okay, and I'm going to explain those in a moment. So these gains are based on the idea that when firms are different, there's more productive, less productive firms, trade is going to induce selection, forcing less productive firms out of the market through competition, and this is going to reallocate market shares toward more productive firms, making the economy more productive and prices dropping. And everybody will benefit from this. So these type of gains were not possible when we were using models where firms were all the same, right? However, there are losses linked to selection. They are related to the fact that not only there are distributional losses, because the distributional effects, because the firms and the workers, the firms that will exit and the workers who lose their job, they're going to be unhappy about it. But the fact that some firms exit will imply a loss of varieties, right? The varieties could shrink, and that could potentially reduce the welfare gains or even eliminate it. So there's been a very, very strong, and I would say purely academic debate on whether these new gains from trade are there or not, more precisely, whether the first bullet and the second bullet offset each other. Okay, so this was started by Arkolakis, Costino, and Rodriguez-Clare. It's been responded by Melitz. Okay, key point. In this discussion, all models, this trade-off between selection, productivity gains of selection, and variety losses, this trade-off is assessed in environments, in economic models, with perfect competition. Models are either static, mostly, or if they're dynamics, there is not endogenous growth, no long-run productivity growth, right? So our take, we're gonna tackle this debate in a model where we're gonna move out of monopolistic competition, in a model where the market structure is going to be endogenous. We're gonna have oligopoly, firms competing strategically for market shares, and we're gonna have an innovation-driven endogenous growth. This was the theory motivation in a way, although there is an applied flavor, right? Especially these days. But the model is going to speak to a set of stylized facts, okay? Which is the following. So we know from several empirical work that trade induces selection, and through selection increases productivity. There's been work that have looked at both at the selection and innovation effects of trade. So trade forces firms, less productive firms, out of the market, reallocating market shares to more productive firms. That this reallocation produces a market size effect that you heard about in the first talk that induces firms to innovate more, right? There is a long-standing tradition in trade in trying to analyze the pro-competitive effect of trade. So opening up to trade affects market power of firms and prices through a reduction of firms' market power, through a reduction of firms' markups, okay? And so recently, Philippe and other people have started looking at the effect of trade integration on product market competition and innovation. Okay, so there is some evidence that trade affects the market power of firms, so increases market competition, and by increasing market competition, at the same time, increases the incentive to innovate. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So how exactly does this work? So I think the competition should all be about the difference between the pre and post-innovation rents, right? So if there's more competition...
You need to wait for that. I need to show you the model, but this is not going to be the model you know. That's going to be one of the points of the talk. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to sketch a model where trade happens under oligopolistic competition with firm heterogeneity and endogenous growth, broadly consistent with those four facts. There are several models consist with one or a subset of those facts. This model can account for all of them. It's not the main motivation of the paper, but it is driving the idea as well. And then we're going to use it to quantify the new gains from trade, highlighting the fact that when you think about Brexit or political decision like that, having a quantitative macro model with sustained long-run growth can make a difference in terms of the number you're going to give politicians. So there is a new emerging literature on this new dynamic gains from trade, very, very, very thin literature. So let me just tell you something. There is, the people at CEP, at London School of Economics, have done an amazing job during this referendum in providing the public debate with a sequence of policy papers analyzing the cost of the effects of Brexit. So when they focus on the trade costs, they analyze the various scenarios, and they did it with a static model. It's a static Ricardian model. They were able, in the worst case scenario, to come up with a loss of 3% of GDP. So then it's a great piece of work, but then they patch up a bunch of reduced form estimation from other papers and say, if we consider dynamic effects, then the losses are going to be 10% of GDP, right? So why did they do that? Well, the dynamic gains from trade, we don't have an Eton quantum for dynamic gains from trade at the moment, so they went for reduced form. So one of them, Tom Sampson, has a model, okay, and is the second model in this literature that's looked at that. The first is mine. He finds that it's a model of growth through technology diffusion. There is no innovation, okay? And he finds that the dynamic gains, okay, make the total gains from trade a triple compared to a static model. The reason why probably they didn't use this model is that the static gains in his model are very low. Introducing innovation, so growth is going to be driven by innovation, like in many of the papers we have seen here, and oligopoly, so an endogenous market structure, we find that there are large gains, both static and the dynamic component is going to double the total gains from trade. So this is the model. We're going to have an intertemporal utility. There is a log with an homogeneous good and a set of intermediates, okay? So these differentiated goods, these varieties, so the homogeneous good is going to be the numerator, the wage is going to be equal to 1. So here, to model oligopoly, I'm going to follow Peter Neary approach. So each one of these homogeneous good here, okay, of these heterogeneous varieties, each one of these varieties, instead of having, if you have in mind the Mallet's model, each one of these variety is produced in monopolistic competition by one firm. Here, each one is going to be produced in oligopoly, okay, by a discrete number of firms. Okay, they are going to compete strategically. Each one of these product line, okay, is going to have a productivity. So there's going to be an entry process that I'm going to describe. It's a bit, that's the complicated bit of the paper, where firms enter, they draw the productivity, okay, and then they compete within the product line. Okay? At the moment, we are going to assume that the number of firms competing within the product line is going to be exogenous. I'm going to endogenize it later. So the technology is very standard. Quantity of each one of these intermediate goods is produced with labor, with a productivity index Z tilde, and with a fixed cost lambda. Now, post-entry, the productivity can be improved through an investment in innovation. Investing each unit of labor in innovation, you're going to increase productivity next period. A is a parameter, K is a spillover that I'm going to define in a moment. So here's the spillover. So in order to keep the model tractable, okay, you're going to have two components in the spillover. The first component, which is this one, okay, is going to create a sort of an AK structure, okay? So that is the productivity, okay, of the n-1 firms in my product line. Okay? And that increases my productivity of innovation. Then D is increasing difficulty. So basically the idea, well, I can't go there, I don't have a pointer, but so the idea here is that it works. So innovation is going to be harder for firms, okay, that are more productive compared to the mean. Right? So, and this is going to be, it's a sort of decreasing returns to allow the model to be stationary when we compute the equilibrium. So the household problem is trivial. We are going to look at only at the steady state, and this is the dynamic game, Cournot game played by firms. So each firm chooses a path of quantity produced and innovation in order to maximize their profits, okay? Here I already included the Euler equation. There's going to be a death shock that hits all firms equally every period, okay? And the constraints are the typical. So this is the indirect demand, and this is the typical Cournot constraint. So the firm chooses its quantity, okay, in the quantity constraint, which say the total quantity in my product line is my quantity plus the quantity of the n-1 competitors. And then there is the state equation. Okay? So working out this dynamic problem, we found the equilibrium prices that is going to give you prices as a function of the markup, and the markup is going to be a function of the number of firms. Okay? So theta is the inverse of the markup. The larger is n, the lower is going to be the markup. Okay? Now, you can find the equilibrium firm size, well, the labor demand of each firm. So the labor demand of each firm, and therefore the firm size is going to be higher. The more competitive is the economy. Theta is the inverse of the markup. Higher theta, more competition. And the higher is the productivity of the firm compared to the average. Here I'm just stationarizing the productivity with the steady state growth rate. Okay? So more productive firms will be larger. And when the environment, the economy is more competitive, all firms will be larger. So then the equilibrium innovation rate tells you the same story. Okay? More competition in the economy gives you more innovation. Okay? And more productive firms are going to be more innovative. Okay? Now, this is consistent with what Ufuk and other people have found in the data, so also Mortensen and Lenz. This part is consistent with a lot of other stuff, empirical work that I'm going to talk about. Now, let me finish these two. I'm going to stress this in this crowd because you used to see growth with heterogeneous firms in some sort of versions of Clayton-Kortum that Ufuk has developed brilliantly. So this is not going to be, it's a different setup, which the features are similar. You're not going to have multiplier firms, okay, but you have endogenous markups. I know you can have endogenous markup with Clayton-Kortum, and I suppose that Ufuk's dissertation had endogenous markups, right? But in that case, endogenous markup came from a special assumption on preferences. Here comes from strategic interaction across firms, okay? So then, even more important, here you have a positive effect between competition and innovation, and it's just positive, okay? So you have only the increasing part of the U, but without step-by-step, okay? Why is this important? I love step-by-step model. So this is, it's just important because you're not constrained to have two firms competing. So you're not constrained to have a duopoly, okay? So you can have entry. I'm going to show how entry works. And you can potentially use this to discipline the link between entry and markups, okay? That's about it. You had a question, Joey?
Just a clarifying question. So you have a parameter that captures competition, sort of structural parameter that captures competition?
Yes, I showed you. It's the markup. Right? The markup is a function of substitutability across intermediates and the number of firms.
So intuitively, so this thing is going to, this is the markup, right? So it's going to move with the endogenous number of firms or with the degree of substitutability? So
Both.
For both.
Yeah.
So can you tell us intuitively why, when the markup changes, then the incentives to innovate? Right.
Okay. So this is a good question. I should have. So here, innovation is cost reducing, right? Right. So innovation, you enter, you draw your type, and then you can improve on your type, right? So then, an increasing problem market competition is going to increase the size of firms. Okay, you're going from very, very higher distortions toward perfect competition. So the size of firms is going to increase, and since innovation is cost reducing, the benefit of a dollar save in unit cost is going to be larger. Okay, the larger is the quantity I produce. In a way, it boils down to a market size effect, if you want, created by the reduction in oligopolistic distortions. Okay? It's not an escape competition effect, per se. It's a different mechanism, it's complementary mechanism, if you want. It makes the model a little bit simpler along some dimensions, okay? So in the step-by-step model, the markups are constant, for example. And the pro-competitive effect you get from trade, for example, if you do open economy, is through composition. Okay, you're gonna get more neck-and-neck sectors. Okay, here the single firm markup is affected by policy, in this case by trade policy, and, as I'm going to show in a moment. So it's a different perspective.
And it's not entry threat, right? It's not that you escape entry threat.
No, it's not. It's different. It's a complementary mechanism. So here there is actually pure entry, and you're gonna feel the competition in a way, but it's not entry threat. We don't have that. So here I repeated a few things, but so that component of that increasing difficulty that more productive firms have harder time keeping innovating is going to stationarize the growth. So all firms are going to grow at the same rate. Okay, this is simply because of the externality we're hardwired. So more productive firms innovate more. But since for them it's harder to innovate, in steady state, all firms are going to grow at the same rate. This is the Mallet's trick in a way in a dynamic setup. So what's going to be the equilibrium productivity distribution? Well, it's going to mimic the entry distribution, okay? But it's going to be a traveling wave that travels to the right at the speed of the steady state growth rate, right? So that's going to be it. And makes the model very tractable. The rest is very simple. Now we close the model. So there's going to be a cutoff. Since there are fixed costs, there's going to be a cutoff level of productivity Z star, below which, this is the closed economy, by the way. I haven't talked about trade. Below which firms will not be able to survive. Here is the expenditure per firm. Now, here in the simple model, we're going to have entry of product lines. So the idea is that there are 1 minus m products or product lines, okay, that are inactive and they are potential entrants. At zero cost, every time they enter, and when a product line enters, this is a strong assumption, n firms are going to enter with the product line. At the moment, n is going to be fixed, okay? I'm not going to use a free entry condition here. So they draw from a distribution, okay? And the stationarity of mass of varieties is going to tell you that the flow out is going to be equal to the flow in. Okay? This is the survival times the mass of potential entrants. So here, this is a very tough. So if you remember the trade-off I told you before, okay, trade liberalization is going to increase selection, increase productivity. That's good, but it's going to kill varieties, right? So here, if you have in mind Mallet's, okay, where this is, for Mallet's, there is a mass of potential entrant that is endogenous. Here, the mass of potential, and can go up with liberalization. Here, the mass of potential entrants, when there is selection, always goes down, right? Because it's harder to survive. So it gives you huge losses from varieties. So market clearing, we get the second equilibrium condition, and the model aggregates very nicely. You're going to get a cutoff below which firms are not going to be able to produce. Now, we can mock the effect of liberalization. This is the question that was asked before, simply by increasing theta, by reducing the markup. Okay? Let's see what happens when the markup increases. We can show that analytically that you have an increase in selection. Okay? Why is that? Well, when the markup increases, low productive firms, they have the cash flow shrinking, they cannot break even, and they have to exit. Okay? And we can show that this effect on markups is positive on the star, on the cutoff. It produces loss from variety, and it increases the steady state growth rate. And the idea is exactly my answer to your question, which is the market becomes more competitive, okay? Surviving firms are larger, right? And therefore, they have more incentive to do cost-reducing innovation, okay? This effect on the growth rate can be direct or can come from selection. So if you devise this model with homogeneous firms, you're still going to have this effect. Okay? It's going to be simply not due to reallocation. Okay? with selection, you have also the additional reallocation effect. So in this model, I'm going to take in this talk, I have two perspectives. I'm thinking about an old, I'm comparing the frontier growth models with the growth models of 15 years ago, 10 years ago, where firms were the same. And I'm comparing the classic trade models, okay, they're all static, with some dynamic components. So this is going to be the game they're going to play. So trade in the benchmark market is going to be very simple. Two symmetric countries. Yes.
One question to clarify.
Sure.
So for each variety at this stage, you have entrants, right? Let's say one of them dies because of this reason or the productivity goes under threshold. So do you immediately put another firm in this firm?
So the assumption is that the debt shock delta is on the product line. So we are trying to do sequential exit, okay? And it is, now we know it's doable, but it bulks up the model pretty much. So if you want to extend the model, that's exactly where you have to. So basically you're going to have entry, okay? When you're very productive, you're going to have entry, and the entry rate is going to determine how many firms are there. And then as you have shocks, okay, firms are going to start exiting, okay? And then you're going to have the cutoff firm is going to be the firm where there is only a couple of firms. The product line where there is only a couple of firms, and then you exit, okay? But it makes the model a little bit more complicated.
But then how do you handle the introduced exit?
I haven't showed you. Yeah. So in this model, and in most of the IO models, there's no entry. This N is given, okay? When they do an oligopoly, okay? So it's the biggest challenge. Okay? I'll show you our first take on this challenge in a moment. So trade is very simple. No fixed trade cost. There is only variable trade cost. The prices of a variety has to be the same.
So just to follow up on Harun's point, so there's a heterogeneity of productivities for each firm?
No, within product line, they're all the same.
They all
produce a perfectly substitutable version of that good.
I see. And did you say there's a fixed cost of operation too?
There is a fixed cost of operation.
So so the whole product line falls below the fixed cost.
Yes. Yeah.
All the firms exit at the same
All
time.
the firms exit there.
Then what's the role of innovation? The innovation makes the productivity
Larger.
For everybody.
For the small amount of firms in the product line, yes. Yes.
So within the product line, all the firms have the same productivity, and any innovation benefits everybody simultaneously.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not firm specific; it's industry specific.
If you want to call it industry, yes, but it depends on the elasticity substitution. I mean, then the Mellis model is a model of an industry, right? Because an industry where every variety has. I'm just. Yeah.
Product line specific.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it, just trying to understand.
Yeah, but that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. Don't get me wrong; these are simplifying assumptions, but this is a first take to a different model. But I totally agree with Dufuk. So the price is going to be the same of domestic price and export price. The only thing, since there are export costs now, the markups are going to be different. So the markup on domestic sales is going to be higher than the markup on export sales. When there is a reduction in trade costs, then foreign competition is going to reduce the domestic markup and increase the foreign markup, right? So what happens here is that when you reduce trade costs, okay, you're not going to pass through this reduction in trade costs onto the foreign consumers, but you're going to cash in. Okay? And there is some evidence on this. The average markup in this economy, where all firms export, is going to be a combination between the domestic and export markup. And I can show that the average markup is decreasing in trade liberalization. So tau increases, reduces theta, therefore the markup goes up. So trade liberalization has pro-competitive effects directly through the markups. And the idea is that when you reduce the trade costs, okay? There's going to be, you can think about it, when you reduce trade costs, there's going to be a more effective competition of foreign firms. Actually, if you look at the markup in closed economy and the markup with free trade, the markup in closed economy is the same markup, but instead of having 2n, okay, this is two symmetric countries, it's going to have n, right? So the trade cost mimics these mechanisms. The rest of the equilibrium is the same as in closed economy, just have the same equilibrium equations, but with different markups, right? So therefore, when you liberalize trade, you reduce the markups, and the effects are exactly the same as I showed you. You're going to have selection and innovation effect of liberalization going through this reallocation. Okay? And they're going to be direct, so obtainable in a model with firm, homogeneous firms, and selection that is specific to this reallocation process. Now, let's look at welfare. Okay? So in welfare, so you have, let's focus on, forget about this here, but focus on these, and these are the key variable. Okay? So here, welfare is going to increase if you increase average productivity, and decrease if you reduce the mass of varieties. Okay? This is the trade-off that generates this debate among, Arkolakis and Melitz and all these people. Okay? So, and Atkinson and Bernstein is also in this looks at this trade-off here. So the people that say there are no new gains from trade found that this, the effect of trade on Z bar, on average productivity, and on the mass of variety completely cancel out under some circumstances that I'm going to tell you. So what I'm going to show you that if you move from monopolistic competition to oligopoly, this is not necessarily true. And if you add growth, which none of these models have, this is even less true. Okay? So I can show exactly that this can be positive under some condition, okay, even without the growth part, but then you need to add the growth part as well. That is always positive. Now, you can debate, I have a fully endogenous growth model, you can debate, why don't, we don't, this is very, very strong assumption, you can have a semi-endogenous growth model. Well, that would force me to compute the transitional dynamics, okay, but this effect is going to be here as well, unless the economy doesn't have transitional dynamics. So now I'm going to answer Aaron's question, so we are going to generalize the model in two directions. First of all, each one of these n firms pay a phi entry cost, okay, to draw their Z. Okay? So now, the entry structure is the following. They don't know where they're going to enter, right? They cannot direct entry. Okay? So therefore, there's going to be a free entry condition, okay, for the entire economy. Okay? So they're going to enter until expected profits are going to be equal to this phi cost, and that's going to bring down the number of firms. While the stationarity condition that I showed you before is going to keep pinning down the mass of variety. There are two conditions here. One more entry condition compared to Melitz. Now, what Arun had in mind is a more complicated entry strategy. Okay, where so this is not going to give you a different markup for different product lines. The entry strategy you had, and we have a version of that, a static version of that, is going to give you a full distribution of markup, and is a much more powerful model, but it's harder to handle. So, and then we can also add some fixed cost to introduce selection into export, so not all firms will export, right? So the structure of the model is going to be exactly the same as before. The market for non-exporters behave as in a simple autarky model, and the market for exporters behaves as in the simple costly trade model. We're going to have two cutoffs now, but as before, the firm size is going to be a function of competition, okay? This is domestic firms, and the relative productivity of firms. And the same way for exporters. Okay? The spillover are a bit more complicated, but let me skip this. And so the steady state innovation is going to be, again, exporters are going to be Yes. So non-exporters, this is a typo. This has to go here. This is non-exporters. Non-exporters are going to innovate less than exporters because this is larger. And more productive firms in general are going to innovate more. So here I'm adding a new layer. Not only more productive firms innovate more, but since more productive firms will end up being exporters, they innovate more than non-exporters. Okay? But I deal with the externality in a way that I'm still going to have symmetric growth. So the investment in innovation is going to be larger for more productive firms, larger for exporters, but the steady state growth rate is going to be symmetric. Therefore, like in Mellets, you're going to have that the equilibrium distribution is a truncation of the initial distribution, but in this case, it's going to be a traveling wave. Right? So then the cutoffs are as the same here. You need to, the export cutoff is going to, the exporter is going to compare the benefit from exporting and not exporting, right? And this is going to hinge on the difference between the markups, okay? This is the free entry condition, and I mentioned before, and this closes the model. Now, this general model is not tractable, so we calibrated and explore its property numerically. We're going to calibrate to US aggregate firm-led statistics, and we assume a Pareto distribution of firms. So here is the calibration. A set of parameters is exogenous. We take it from external sources. And the others we calibrate, okay? Actually, Ufuk, we call this simulates the method moments. I call it calibration, but it's the same thing. So we minimize the distance between the moments and the data through an iterative algorithm. And we match quite a bit of interesting moments. We have the markup. These are all US data, productivity growth, markup, share of exporters. The import penetration ratio here is about 10%, so import over GDP. The log employment premium over exporters, standard deviation, and profits over GDP. Here we fall a bit short, but right. So this is the first exercise to explore qualitatively, quantitatively the model, but we're going to look at data in a moment. So when trade cost goes, so this is the benchmark. The benchmark trade cost is about 8%. Okay, so at 20% trade cost in this economy, there is no trade. Okay, trade is very elastic here. So here, when tau goes from 1.2 to 1, okay, the economy goes from zero trade to almost 20% import penetration ratio. So that's a big liberalization. Right? So when you liberalize trade, there is an increase in the number of firms per product line. Okay? What's the idea here? Well, when you liberalize trade, there is a market size effect that induces entry. So entry is going to reduce markup for domestic firms. Okay? Among exporters, their domestic markups will go down because the number of firms has gone up, but also because there are more foreign firms entering now. So in a way, the capacity of foreign firms to compete with you is stronger the lower the trade cost. And their export markup goes up. Why? Well, when the trade cost goes down, I'm not going to pass it through to the foreign consumer. This is pricing to market, right? It's always true in this oligopoly model. But on average, also exporters' markup go down. So the effect of this competition effect, so trade is selection, so domestic survival becomes harder. The new exporters' margin, so exporters, more firms enter the export market. Why? Well, because the domestic markup is lower and the export markup is higher. Okay? So this is not just like Mellits. You remember, in Mellits, the story is that the variable costs go down, okay? Then more firms want to export because it's easier. Now, here there is the extra layer of the markup. Since there is pricing to market, okay, when you liberalize trade, Okay? There is a lot of competition on domestic sales, okay? And there is easier access on foreign sales. Okay? There are these two marginal items. Right. So, innovation, which is what we care about here, especially in this conference. Who innovates more after trade liberalization? It turns out to be the exporters. Okay? Why? Well, that's very easy. Look at this. There is selection here. Okay? There is a lot of exit at the bottom of the productivity distribution. There is reallocation, and this reallocation, you can work this out, is going to, this market share are going to go to the most productive firms that are the exporters. Okay? So then domestic firms are shrinking. When I look at sales, I can see it very easily. And therefore, their export goes down. Sorry, their innovation goes down. On the other hand, trade liberalization increases the market size of exporters, thereby increasing their incentive to innovate. The aggregate effect of these competition, selection, and innovation effects is an increase in the growth rate and increasing welfare. I told you the stories, and I told you the story as well. So let's go back to facts. So this model has shown that trade reduces firm level, or you want product level markups, okay? In a way that it's interesting because it's compatible with very recent evidence by DeLocker and Penny Goldberg, where they have this Indian data and they see that there is this incomplete pass-through of trade liberalization. So the export markup increase when you liberalize trade in India, but the average markup go down, okay? Because exporters have to drop their markup on domestic sales. The paper reproduces some of the mechanisms, specific mechanisms in this empirical work by Nick Bloom and co-author and Paula Bustos, where the exposure to Chinese penetration increases innovation, mostly among exporters, and within firm. This is not reallocation. This is within firm. It can be reallocation as well, but it's mostly within firm. And it's led by exporters, okay? Now, trade affects product market competition, and through that, selection, innovation, and growth. So here, Rachel Griffith and co-author have looked at, using product-level data, they have looked at the European Single Market Program, which is what this big integration program the European Union at the beginning of the 90s, and they find that that liberalization program, that involved a lot of trade liberalization parts, increases competition, innovation, productivity, growth. Philippe and co-authors with the UK data found that firms are positively, UK firms are positively correlated to foreign entry and to competition. Yeah. So in a way, Philippe, this is the competition effect here is complementary to what you have because it happens at the intensive margin, where you have this composition effect that generates competition. Okay? And it's not escape entry because there is not this entry threat here. Okay, it's another additional piece of the puzzle, I suppose. Yes.
So about these facts, I'm actually part of this an ongoing paper by David Arthur and co-authors using US data, where they find that US domestic innovation goes down in response to opening up with China. It's still preliminary, but just so in your model you have two channels, right?
Yeah.
Domestic firms that don't export will reduce innovation.
Exactly.
But it seems like you will always get that domestic firms, including the exporters, there will always be a net increase in innovation? Or can it
No. They will, yeah. Steady state innovation will be reduced.
Even if you include the domestic exporters?
What do you mean by domestic exporters?
So
this. Okay, so I haven't broken down the innovation by, it's very difficult, right? Because I have exporters and non-exporters. It's very difficult to break down. I could do it, actually. So I could take the exporters and see whether, because innovation is like when I'm an exporter, I just improve on my type, and then I decide how much I sell abroad and how much I sell domestically. It's not that I innovate only for the domestic market. Let's talk about this later. It's interesting. I want to show you a little bit of welfare. You know, I did this big statement on welfare, and now I'm going to show you. So how do you compute welfare? We're going to have a static and a dynamic part of welfare. The dynamic is going to be produced by the steady-state growth rate. I do compensating variation between the autarky equilibrium and the trade equilibrium. And I do the same thing for the growth compensating variation, for the dynamic gains. So here is the effects. So this is, I'm reporting the difference between autarky, okay, and benchmark trade. You remember benchmark trade is a 10% import penetration ratio. Markup goes down from 29 to 20%. It is a 33% increase in average productivity. Growth is 0.8% in autarky, 1.25% at benchmark, okay? The total welfare gains are 51% of consumption when you move from zero, absolutely no trade. So this is a large gain. This is a very large gain, okay? But I care about this a bit less than the following two numbers. So static and dynamic gains are pretty much similar, okay? So this total gain is split half and half between static and dynamic. So if you look at trade gains with a static version of this model, okay, then you're going to miss about a half of the gains. And this is very robust, okay? What I showed you is this. So the gains, I'm moving from here to here, but and this is the breakdown, direct and, dynamic and static. But you can see that it's, you can see that the dynamic gain is larger all through, if you do larger liberalization or if you do shorter liberalization, okay? So finally, I'm going to do this exercise of going back to the 90s, okay? I'm going back to Aghion in 1998. And I suppose that I construct a counterfactual economy where when you liberalize trade, the cutoffs don't move. So this counterfactual economy is exactly identical at the benchmark calibration to our economy, benchmark economy. But then when I'm going to move the trade cost, I'm not going to let this economy change the cutoffs. So you shut down, okay, the extensive margin. There is no selection, okay? And then we compare the welfare gains. So the welfare gains, let's look at benchmark, compare benchmark to autarky, is way lower, 6% of consumption compared to 50%, and is still mostly dynamic, which still proves that, that the growth part is important. So if you compare the gains we had with the heterogeneous firms model when selection was active and when selection was shut down, okay, well then if you look at the total gains, well, the total gains are 10 times larger. So selection is pretty powerful. So if you would look at the gains from trade 15 years ago, you would miss a large chunk of these gains, even if you had a dynamic model. That's my point. Now, I haven't talked about this. I'm going to close with this. So this is the elasticity of trade to trade cost. When there is no trade, the elasticity is very high. So when you reduce trade costs, okay, there is a lot of increased jump in trade, okay, and then it goes down. But notice, in the benchmark model, the elasticity is always higher than in the model without selection. Okay? Now, why is this important? So, ACR, the Arconazzi-Rodriguez-Clare paper, they make a big impact in the profession because they say, if I'm going to give you 3 macro restrictions, okay, which is balanced trade, aggregate profits are a constant share of revenue, and CES demand with constant trade elasticity, okay? The gains from trade in Mellitz are exactly the same as the gains from trade in Krugman. There is nothing new. It's a powerful statement, right? So it turns out, and that's what they show, that Mellits with unbounded Pareto satisfy these three restrictions. Okay? So now, what Mellits and Redding recently on the AR do, well, they say, well, but these are very restrictive assumptions. If I go with bounded Pareto, okay, they show that with bounded Pareto, the trade elasticity is not constant. So basically, if you reduce the trade cost by 10% in the Krugman model and in the Mellits model, okay, the increase in trade you get is completely different. Because in the Mellits model, you have this selection story going on, right? And you see it here. The elasticity is not constant, okay, and completely different. But what's our contribution? We have unbounded Pareto. So the only thing we do, we move from monopolistic competition to oligopoly. Okay? And of course, with oligopoly, with endogenous market structure, demand elasticity is very, very variable. Sure.
But you moved away from CES, or you kept
CS, we don't kept CS.
You moved away from CES in your because we had discussions with the elites about that, and so we thought, to depart from Sonderstein and in particular, you see, one thing was to move away from CES, but you found a way to not have to move away from CES.
Yes.
That's another way to...
That's another. That simplifies things on some dimensions, complicated on another dimension. So basically, if you want to...
If you're summarizing one sentence, what makes you be able to do it without moving away from CES? What did you add? What is the thing that you did?
Strategic interaction across firms, oligopoly. That gives you demand elasticity, okay, that is very responsive to market size. That's the key message. Yes?
When you're changing the elasticity, the number of firms in each variety. So when you're moving the...
Not only, because if you stare at the trade, if you stare at this is important. Sorry, Philippe, if I interrupt you for a moment. So if you stare at this markup, okay, this markup goes down with trade costs. Okay? So this means it's like when you reduce trade costs, it's like you're increasing the number of foreign firms, even if N stays the same, but foreign firms can attack you more easily. So it's both. My answer to your question is both.
Yeah, it would be great to separate the channels. My intuition would be that N is the dominant force. That in some sense, what is making this elasticity vary is the fact that sometimes you will get 5 firms competing, sometimes you will get 15, depending on what...
It could be. That could be done easily. I mean, in the model without free entry, there is only the trade cost motive channel, and the other model, I can do a calibration of the two and look at the difference, for example. Yeah, that's a good point. So let me conclude. Ufuk has already signaled that my time is up. So this is a model of oligopoly trade. I showed you a model of oligopoly trade, firm heterogeneity in endogenous productivity growth, and I use this model to look at the pro-competitive effects of trade. They trigger selection, innovation, and productivity growth. These predictions are in line with a rich set of stylized facts, and probably more. And then I use this model to quantify the gains from trade, and I show that growth doubles, endogenous growth doubles the gains from trade obtainable in static models, and oligopoly leads to variable trade elasticity and clearly gives you new positive gains from selection, at both static and dynamics. Of course, this is, and I want to make this clear, this is a first step in a different, in the model it is not, in the modeling strategy is not very much explored because entry is complicated in these models because you have the discrete number of firms that creates problem even in the computation. But it is very promising, and I think if you have to generate endogenous markup, Philippe, I mean, it is firms competing, it's not in the preferences. I mean, I want it with general preference. I think it's more general. I think I'm going to close here. Yeah. Well.